Again, this is the 2019 payroll year-end webinar. You should see on there a visual contract company, demo company, and also the year-end tax letter for year-end closeout instructions that we had sent. Everyone should have gotten that. I also attached a copy of that letter with the invitation or the link for this meeting, so you should have that readily available. We're going to review that. The letter that went out just last week and lets you know that we do have an update available for the new year of 2020 for the W-4 form that changed. That update brings back head of household option, and which the government had gotten rid of on your tax table. So in admin, payroll, tax tables, federal, you have the information tab, you have the single and the married. And for those of you old timers, you will remember we used to have head of household, and then the government got rid of it several years ago, so we also got rid of it, and now they've brought back that option with the new tax changes on the new W-4 form for 2020. So if you're unfamiliar with the new W-4 form for 2020, you can find it online by typing 2020 W-4, and you should be able to see that form, and that is just a new form that new employees have to fill out. Your old employees do not have to fill it out. Your old employees can remain at what they currently are set to. If you hire somebody new, they will have to fill out this new 2020 form. And your old employees can elect to fill it out if they choose to, but they do not have to. So the major change was the head of household. The update also brings the new 1094, 1095 reports. If you use that option, every year the government changes the file for 1094, 1095, updates it for the current year. So we have to update our software every year for the current 1094, 1095 files. So that is another purpose for the visual contract update. You do not have to have that update before you close the year. You do not have to have that update before you start the new year's payroll for 2020. You do have to have that update before you file the 1095-C forms electronically. And that does not happen until the end of January. So you have the entire month of January or until you're ready to actually print out 1095-C forms before you need that update. So I know several of you have already been scheduled for that and may have already received it. But it's nothing to panic about. We don't have to have it right away before the year end. So this first part of the letter talks about the 1095, 1094-C form reporting and whether or not you are responsible to report that information. And you and your accountant need to work together to determine that. We cannot tell you if you are required to do it. We can tell you that the IRS has a new federal security requirement, and the link that we've attached in this letter, I will go ahead and click on, and it will bring you directly to their Affordable Care Act information page. And if you scroll down to this section here, the biggest thing that is going to affect you guys as customers is the security upgrade. If you click on the security upgrade, they have new standards on this, in which they changed the way that they're going to prove who you are, and they're going to verify information as to who you are and that you have the right access to do this. So they give you three options in order to personally verify that you're working for this company. So the three options are listed there. You can read those three options and see which one best suits your company, which one best will apply to how you guys want to do this. Now, they are asking for a lot of personal information, so my recommendation would be to give them the least amount of personal information that you can. But if you're going to do the option 3, which is to request an activation code by mail, you would need to do this in a timely manner, because it takes 10 days for delivery and 30 days um, after you get that to enter the code and complete the identification process. So it does take some time for you to do that. So this is an upgrade by the IRS that we really have no choice about, but you need to read this and determine how you will best handle that. And that was this link that was in our letter in the security upgrade section that's underlined there. So since last year's W-2s, you should review those and see if you had any unusual items like group term life insurance, third-party sick pay, automobile usage that you need to report on your W-2 form. If you had to do them last year, most likely you will have to do them again this year. And if you have to do them this year, you should do them before you close out 2019 payroll. Because once you close it out, you can't add things back into it. So you should look over what you did last year. And even if you don't have the forms on file, you could rerun the W-2s in our reports menu, payroll, year end, and then W-2 forms. You could rerun them to paper or screen, but you would need to set the current year back to last year. Now my data here is old because it's a demo company that does not get updated with current data. So I set it back to last year. I put in the Social Security limit for 2018, which I believe was 127.9, and then you could rerun the W-2s and you could see, make my screen a little bigger here. You can see the special earnings on this section of the form as to what you had reported last year. Now, on the back of most of the W-2 forms, it will tell you what these codes mean, and the IRS gives you a description. So if you are unsure what the codes are, you can always look back there. And then this would give you everybody, if there's nothing here, then they had no special earnings for that particular employee, and this one does. And then you can just go through and see who had special earnings and who didn't, and if they then qualify to have special earnings again this year. Attached to this report or this document that we sent you is to the way to report the some of the special earnings, like the employer-sponsored health coverage. We have instructions, and these are special earnings that need to go on the W-2. So the employer-sponsored health coverage, if you record the amount per pay period, that means you don't have to enter anything at the end of the year because you've been doing it all along, all throughout the year. And these were the instructions that you would have followed in order to do that. If you wait till the end of the year to do it, this next page is the instructions how to do it as one entry to record the amount for the entire year. So you would do this entry before you close out 2019 payroll, and you would follow these step-by-step instructions on how to do that. If you have questions or need help doing it, you can always call in support, and we'll be happy to help you with it. Employers that have to file 250 or more W-2s are required or may be required to report the cost of employer-sponsored health coverage on the W-2 forms and on electronic filing. So if you never had to do this before because you were never over 250 employees, but now this year you've gone over that threshold, you may need to do this for the first time and may not realize it. As always, you should check with your accountant for assistance to see if you must do this or not. So again, this has a section for entering special items, enter time cards for special items before the last payroll. And if you have group term life that we just talked about, auto usage, or taxable third-party sick pay, you do have to enter time cards according to the instructions and then print fake checks for them. You also need to enter on their employee file the deductions that would account for those. So on the employee file, on the deductions tab, you have, like this employee has auto use here. And then you can set up that it's an amount and what the amount of the auto use would be for the year. Now, some of you, if you had auto use from the employee for last year, and you're going to have auto use this year, but it's a different amount, some of you might have the maximum and accumulated filled in. If those are filled in, you want to zero the accumulated because it was last year's total, and that does not get zeroed when you zero out the employee file totals at the year end. You want to set the amount and the maximum to the same amount, and that will then stop that deduction from being taken out when the year-to-date amount reaches the maximum. So your maximum would be 500, your accumulated would be 0, and your year-to-date would be 0. Once you put in a time card, calculate a check, post it to the employee file. It will update the year-to-date with $500. The year-to-date equals the maximum, so it stops taking out the deduction. So to figure out when your last payroll of the calendar year would be, the government requires you to report earnings based on check date, so the day that you dated your checks. So if you look at the calendar here, if your last pay period is the 21st and you pay on a Thursday, your checks would be dated the 26th. Then payroll for the 28th, the checks would be dated on the 2nd of January. So that would be your first payroll in January. Now, even though most of that week, all of that week is worked in December because it's based on the check date, it would have to be your January payroll, your first payroll in January. So after you closed week ending of 12/21, you would need to go through the steps of closing out the year and then update your tax tables, and then you can proceed with the first payroll of 2020. Now, some of you may want to force it into December, and that is possible, but you'd have to change your check date, and you'd have to pay them out on December 31st. If you're using direct deposit, you would have to make sure that your bank could process the file in a 2-day period. Some banks have a required waiting period for processing your direct deposit files. If you process it if the payroll ends on a Saturday and you can't get it to them till Monday afternoon or Tuesday, they may not be able to process it the same day, which is why they process it usually on a Thursday. So you can force paper checks easier because you can change the date of the check and then mail them or hand them out to your employees on the 31st. But if it's a direct deposit date, you should make sure to check with your bank to make sure that they can process it in the same year. Otherwise, you will have to make sure it falls into the new year. We have attached in this document the calendar year-end checklist. So when you are sure that you are done with payroll for 2019, you would follow the steps in the checklist. So the steps in the checklist are to print the fourth quarter payroll reports, and that is reports payroll quarterly. And then it gives you the options to print these. Now, you can also reprint the reports at any time for previous years. So if you go into the reports, the current year always defaults to current, and it tells you what your current year is. If you wanted to print it for a previous year, you need to change the year column, the top one that says current, not the current year. So you change this to be the year you want to print for. That will gray out the current year, and the system will no longer read that, and then it will print out the information for the year that you have displayed in this box. You can also change the quarter to the fourth quarter. You would put in your Social Security limit, which is $132,900 for the current year. This all defaults from the tax table files, so you should not need to change this at all, as does this. And if you just go to the screen, oh, this data is not good, so that's why it's doing that. But here is the 941 adjustment options, where this is the payments that you made for the month. And you can change these payments if for some reason that you need to. This is what's going to show on the Schedule B part of the form. So if you need to change these at all, you can just click in here and type in a number that you want to change it to. And by doing that, I just made an adjustment of $52 on my form. This will give you a list of the employees and what their wages are for the current quarter and the prior quarter. This also shows you what the federal tax 941 form should look like. Now this form looks just like the form that the government issues, or that the government wants you to fill in. It will have in dollar values and dollar amounts in these columns for whatever your current wages are. This form is not designed to be filed with the government. It is designed for you to use this as a guideline to what to fill in on your normal form. I would run this again for the current period. This now brings in deposits that I've made. Still, if you get this message where you have an adjustment, that indicates that there is a problem with the form and that you need to resolve whatever that adjustment is. So you need to call us and we can help you resolve whatever the problem would be with it. This just gives you the listing of the employees and their wages for the current quarter. And then here is the actual 941 form with the wages filled in. Line 7 is your adjustment amount, which should be less than $1. Usually there's always fractions of cents. There's also adjustments for third-party sick pay sometimes. So sometimes the amount showing up in here could be what your third-party sick pay was. Because usually with third-party sick pay, you end up paying both portions of Social Security and Medicare. So then it doesn't not get recorded as something that the employee paid into. But usually we can help you resolve this, and if it's under $1, it's usually okay. The second page is where you can sign and stuff. But like I said, this form was not designed to be filed. It is designed just as a guideline. The third page is the Schedule B, which has the amounts from the very first page that we saw, which gives you your tax liability for each month that you should have paid in. It should equal your deposits. The next quarterly report is the Illinois 941. And that is a new law a couple years ago where they require you to fill out the 941 for Illinois. And it's pretty much the same, similar form. It's going to give you a chance to enter your deposits or review your deposits to see if you need to make changes. And it's going to have the 941 form. So the form is different than the federal form. Again, this is a guideline. It's not designed to be filed directly to the Illinois Department of Revenue, but is a guideline for how you should fill out the form, the official form that you should file. SWT, this is the state withholding report. That last report was federal, was the state was this Illinois state withholding report that they require. This federal report or the state report here will show you the state tax withheld by employee. The other report did not show that. This one does show what's withheld per employee and what their state taxable wages were. If you work in multiple states, this will also come up with the different states, SWT. The FUT report is the FUTA report, which is your federal unemployment tax. This will show you what your FUTA wages were and what you should have paid for the quarter. Most of the time, by the time you get to the fourth quarter, your FUTA wages are zero because you only pay it on the first $7,000 of wages. So 90% of your people have probably already made $7,000 by the time you reach the fourth quarter. The SUT report is the SUTA report. It can be run for different states as well. You can also have a text file that you can create that you can upload to the federal government or to the state government for reporting purposes. I'll put in Illinois for my state. And here is the state unemployment report. And this you only pay on the first $12,960. And then the percentages vary based on what your unemployment percentage is. So each company's percentage is normally different. SUT by time card is the same report, just in a different format. And it goes out and reads the individual time cards, so this report may vary slightly from the other one, because it reads the time cards and then it calculates the tax on a per time card basis versus a per check basis. Check ledger is a ledger of all the checks or recording of all the checks. Let's get back to the year. Just a listing of all of your checks for the quarter. So it'll show you the checks that the employees got, their check numbers, the totals for the period. After you've printed your quarterly reports and you have your year-end reports, the year-end reports has a year-end 941, a year-end state withholding, a FUTA, a SUTA. It also has a W-2 totals report. This report will show you what your W-2 totals are going to be. You have to enter the Social Security limit. This report compares federal withholding wages and state withholding wages. So unless you work in multiple states, all your employees should only have one line on this report. If they have a second line below their name for SWT wages, then that means their SWT wages and their federal withholding wages do not equal each other. And they always should. So if they didn't, you would see this line here, SWT local wages. You would see that underneath the employee with a different amount than what the federal column says. If they don't equal and you don't work in multiple states, then there's something wrong with their wages for the year. If you do work in multiple states, then you need to look at the state withholding totals reports for that state and see if the two add up to what their federal wages are, because their state wages should always equal their federal wages. The W-2 forms can be printed at a later time. You do not need to print them before you close out the year. These can be printed anytime prior to the 31st of January when you need to put them on to the employees. That is when they are due. And we recommend that you print them to the screen and even to paper first before you print them on the forms. Because once you normally only have a limited number of forms that you order, and once you use the forms, they cannot be undone and reused. So if they print wrong or the numbers are incorrect or you forgot to enter some special earnings and you need to go back and do it, you've wasted a bunch of forms already that you need to redo. So we recommend that you look these over and you can print them to paper or just look at them on the screen to make sure that everybody's got the earnings that they're supposed to have. W-2 electronic filing. If you file electronically, you can create this file, and it goes out and it creates an electronic file that you can upload to the government's website. And we'll go over that in a few minutes here. This report creates a report called W-2 report, and you'll find it after you have exported that report. It will be in your import-export directory. So whatever that path is, that is where you should be able to find that report called W-2 report. So if I go to reports, payroll, year end, and I do my electronic filing, and I put in my Social Security limit, so it tells me that the W-2 report already exists. If you get this message, what we recommend is that you say no to replacing it, that you would go out and find that report and rename it to have old in front of it. So you can find the report on your data directory, right-click, rename it, and or put the year behind it, like put 2018. And then you can create that report a second time, and it will not ask you that same question that you want to overwrite it, because that report will then not exist. So once you rename it out of the way, it won't exist anymore. So the W-2 report that you rename has a listing. It says the electronic file is in the format and the order that the government requires it to be in. If you were to open that file and look at it, it wouldn't probably make a lot of sense to you because it's all kind of coded. So once you create that file, it can be created multiple times if you have to change something. And if, for example, you realize that you created the file, but then you forgot to add somebody's auto use into there, you could recreate the file and override it when it asks you that question, if you know that it's for the current year. But if last year's file exists as a W-2 report name, then you need to rename it with the year at the end of it. The 1095-C and 1094-C forms are also printed from this menu. They are printed to plain paper. There is no forms for them. You have to have filled in on the employee file in the history. So on the year-to-date totals tab is where we have the employer-provided health insurance offer and coverage. You can come in here per employee on the current year, or you can do it after you've transferred it to the history file in the backup step. A lot of you have started working on this in the current year already to get a head start on it, which is fine because this stuff will then transfer to the history file when you zero out the employee file totals. But you would mark them as 1095-C. You can do either all 12 months, or you can go in and individually fill out each month if he only worked for you for a month or 2 months. So the offer codes, I think 1C is one of them, but they are available on the 1095 information page, which I'll show you the link for that. You could also probably get them from your accountant. Excuse me. So if the employee worked all 12 months and he paid $150 a month for his portion of his health insurance, you would then just fill out that first box of all 12 months, and you could do a safe harbor code, Again, I'm not sure exactly what the codes are. But that would fill it in for all 12 months, and then basically you're done with that employee. You could save it, and he's filled in. Now, if you don't want to do all 12 months, like I said, you can just go click into each individual month and put in whatever months he did work and what the codes were. We also have an option to import 1095 information. And we have a master Excel report that is has all the employees in it, or what it basically links to your data and can pull in all your employees. It is a Excel sheet. Bring one up for you here. So this is what the Excel sheet would look like. The yellow boxes are what you would fill in. So you would fill in 2016 for the calendar year. You can change, these are union IDs, so it's going to basically set to defaults to all unions, all employees. You can set the value for all unions or all employees on the 1095, whether you're printing them, yes or no. The drop-down arrow gives you an option to select yes or no. If I click in the next box, offer of coverage code, the drop-down arrow appears, and I can click on that. That gives me my different offer codes. I can select what offer code I want. The minimum coverage value, I can put an amount in here, or I can leave it blank as 0 if I want to fill in what each employee individually is paying, because everybody's probably different unless your company has a set amount. The safe harbor code, again, pulls in a drop-down. I can select the safe harbor code that applies. And if I click get data, not sure if it's going to work because I don't think I set my connection. Anyway, the option would be to get data, and then it would pull in your employee's information, your employee ID, union ID. That's not going to work. So at any rate, it would pull in your employee information, and then you could edit that information and put in the correct information for each employee. But that worksheet is what gets imported here into the 1095C import file. And it defaults to 1095C XLSM, which is what that is called, but you can rename it to something else or go out here and search for it and find the correct document to import. And then it would fill in all of the information on the employee file for you, so that then you could print these reports without having to fill in. So the forms print on plain paper along with the 1094C, and then you just print them to your printer. The 1095 electronic filing creates another electronic file that you can upload to the government, and we'll go over the websites to do that as well. If you need help with trying to get these forms to work, or how that they will help you with your creating of the forms, you can just give us a call and we can go over it with you. After you've completed the rest of the year-end steps, There are calendar year-to-date reports that you can also print. And if it's the end of your fiscal year, you can also print the fiscal year reports. We also have a miscellaneous deduction report, which will give you a listing of all the payroll deductions that got taken out of all the employees' checks for the year. It can be a helpful report if you want to see what your deductions were for the year. It's also a very long report, so I would recommend totals only. Otherwise, it's going to give you each deduction for every pay period. And if you hit totals only, it'll just give you a summary for each employee. So it'll show you their deduction codes, and it'll show you the amounts, and these are year-to-date amounts of what they got taken out for each employee for the year. Now, if you run it without totals only, then it's going to give you each week. So on week 1-4, he had these deductions. On week 1-2, he had these. And these are scanning multiple years because this demo company has never been closed out. But the point is, it shows you each week of payroll. And if you have 52 weeks of payroll out there and a lot of employees, its report can be very long. So the monthly reports, if you offer 401k to your employees, under reports payroll monthly, you would also need to run the 401k deduction report. That would be run for the month of December, because that is what you're in. Mine's not going to run because I don't have data in there. If you have data in there, it will default to beginning and ending pay periods. And I don't have 401k in this company, so there is nothing to print. But that would show you the 401k amounts. You could also run it for the entire year by just entering a beginning and ending pay period. Of your first pay period, which may be like 12/28/15 through, let's say, we through 12/21 of 19. So you could run it from last year's last pay period of 12/28 through this year's of 12/21 and get your report for the entire year. The other monthly reports are pretty much just the standard ones that you would normally run if you're in the habit of running those. Once you've printed all your reports, you verify that everything's done and everything is the way you expect it to be. The next step, and one of the most important steps for closing out the year, is step 6. Back up the year-end employees and 0 year-to-date totals. And that is done in admin payroll year-end. Now, this step, when it is done, it clears the employee year-to-date totals. It clears the 1095-C information, and it creates a backup file. Now, about a backup file, if you go under payroll employee history, you can see that you have other years out here of payroll. And in there is what the payroll was at the time that you cleared, or at the time that you zeroed for that year. So it takes a screenshot of all of the wages and the year-to-date totals and the 1095 information, and makes a picture of it and a copy of it and saves it for you so you can review it at another time or get back to it. Now, you can come in here in the history file and make changes to the 1095, because that's what most of the people do. They don't do it till after they've already zeroed out. You can tell you're in the history file because the employee ID will be grayed out and you see a year up here in the corner, which is not in the normal employee record. I go to File, Payroll, Employees, I'm in the current year, I don't have this year here. So on the history file, you'll always see a year as to what year you're in. So what it does is it goes out and it zeroes all these year-to-date amounts here. It zeroes all the quarterly totals, all the year-to-date totals. And it zeroes these out too and moves them to the history file. And that makes it a clean start for the new year. So all your start out zero. You also should do the fiscal year if it's the end of your fiscal year as well. You should do the fiscal year checklist, which the fiscal year checklist has you printing fiscal year reports, has you zeroing the employee file total for payroll. The only steps you need to do are the payroll steps. The accounts payable, accounts receivable, job cost, and general ledger steps should wait and can wait until after you've closed December for those modules. You're not going to probably close December for those modules until sometime in January or February. So those can wait. Those are not time sensitive. The payroll ones are the ones that are time sensitive and need to be done before you start your next payroll for the new year. Because otherwise, it will add your current year employee file totals for 2020 to your 2019 totals if you have not zeroed out prior to starting 2020 payroll. Again, the steps on the calendar year, accounts payable, receivables, job cost, and general ledger can all be done sometime in January or February. You just need to do the first 7 steps here for payroll. So after you've backed up and zeroed, the next step is to make your changes to your federal and state tax tables. That is in admin, payroll, tax tables, federal. Now, we have not received the updated tax tables or tax changes yet from the federal government. We have not. We check that website daily to see if they've been released yet, and it has not been. As soon as they are released, we will be sending you an email and letting you know what the changes are and how to update your software to accommodate those changes. So currently, this is what it was for 2019. The Social Security limit will most likely go up. The percentages always usually stay the same. Standard exemption, I believe, is going to change. The federal unemployment percentage usually stays the same, and the unemployment maximum stays the same. I do know the 401k limits usually go up every year. This is the amount that they can take out, the maximum amount that they can take out, and this is the maximum catch-up limit for people over 50. And the additional Medicare has stayed the same the last several years, so we don't normally anticipate that to change. The big changes come in the single and the married tabs, where these limits all will change, which will change the tax that you pay, which also percentages sometimes will change too. And the single table is usually different than the married table, and we will give you that information with print screens of these screens. You can just come in here and change these amounts. The new one for head of household, we should have information on that when we send you the tax table and how you to fill out that as well. Once you've changed them and you save it, you can exit out and then you can go to state, local. Now you notice we come up to Alaska. That's because we have all 50 states in here and some local county taxes. So you need to use your binoculars. Do a lookup and find Illinois. And then this is where you want to change the tax table, the taxes. Now, Illinois mostly just changes, or if they do change it, they would change the percentage. They haven't changed it in a few years, but I'm not sure what's going to happen this year. This is also where the state unemployment tax percentages are stored. you should have each gotten a letter or an email from the Illinois Department of Employment Security as to what your unemployment percentages are for the new year. This is where you would fill those in. And then if the gross limit, we will have that information for you if that has been raised up or not. But the percentages are your responsibility to find from wherever documents that the IDES has sent you with your percentages on there. Now, these, again, should not be changed until you're done with 2019 payroll and ready to start 2020 payroll. So once you've updated your taxes and you've completed everything, your tax changes, you can proceed then with your payroll for the new year. So if you need to decide, if you're an applicable large employer, or called ALE, you need to contact your accountant to determine if you must file and how to complete the forms. So an ALE employee you can go to their website and try to find out what that means and if you guys qualify for that, if your company qualifies, or check with your accountant. I do know that the 1095 forms have to be the employees by January 31st of 2020. And that's the same time that the W-2s have to be to your employees. Generally, as a rule of thumb, we say send out the 1095 forms along with your W-2 forms. That way you only have to mail them once, and you don't have double envelopes to mail them, or if you're handing them out, hand them out at the same time. The Illinois Department of Revenue does require electronic filing now. That changed a couple of years ago. You must be registered with their e-file program, their e-services program. And the same W-2 electronic file that we created in reports, payroll, year end, the W-2 electronic file can also be submitted to the Illinois Department of Revenue. Most of you should have already been registered from last year, but in case you're not, we've got the links here. This link for registration will take you to this website to begin the registration process. Registration process does take some time, so you need to do this in advance. If you have not registered and you need to, you should do it right away. You should try to get it done this week because it will take time for the registration to begin or to be accepted. Once you're registered, and then you can do the electronic transmission upload, here's the website for that. And you can enter the electronic transmission upload website. You will have a username and password. When you're ready to log in, they give you your ETIN and your password, and you would log in. Once you've uploaded the file, you go to this website to get an acknowledgement of what was uploaded. So when you're ready to get the acknowledgement program, and it'll tell you when you upload the file how long you have to wait. Maybe I think it's 24 hours if I remember right from last year. 24 to 48 hours before your acknowledgement is there. Could be sooner, depends on how busy they are, if everybody waits till the last minute. If you file early again, you'll probably get a quicker response. And you can just click start when you're ready to do that. Those are the three links for filing W-2s electronically by the state of Illinois. Now, this is another helpful link that gives you electronic W-2 and 1099 transmittal programs. So this tells you that W-2 filing is mandatory, and it's due January 31st for the Illinois Department of Revenue. 1099 filing is not mandatory. You may do it, but it's not mandatory. So these are just some guidelines that will help you, gives you the filing deadlines, gives you different links for different information if you want to learn more about what the procedures and the processes are for filing electronically. I've been through the calendar year checklist, the fiscal year checklist. Again, the 0 fiscal year totals is in admin payroll year end. Along with the backup of the year end, the next step is the 0 the fiscal year totals. And that clears out under the employee file. It clears out under year-to-date totals. You have a calendar year and you have a fiscal year. If your calendar year and your fiscal year are the same, they both end on December 31st, these totals should be the same. If your fiscal year ends like March or June or September, then you should have run the 0 step after you completed the last payroll. For example, if it's September, you would run the 0 step after you've completed the last payroll for September before you start the next payroll for October. So the fiscal year gets a little tricky if it's not the same as the calendar year, where you have to remember to do that prior to proceeding. Otherwise, these totals will not mean anything and they'll be incorrect. Again, these are the cost of special earnings, the special employee-sponsored health coverage steps. And some of you have done this before, but those of you who haven't, it's basically telling you to enter a clearing account, add a deduction for the cost of employer-sponsored health coverage. It shows you where to go to do that. And then you need an offset record. And then you're adding it onto the employee file. And then entering a time card, which just gets calculated with the regular checks. In this step, when you're doing it for a one-time entry, you enter you set up the clearing account, the deduction, make sure it's on your debit table. Your clearing account is a part of your debit table. You enter the deduction on the employee file, and then you enter a time card for non-taxable pay. And these are the guidelines. Non-taxable amount is the cost of the employee, the coverage that's going to show on the W-2 form. That's also the amount of your deduction. You compute checks, it should create a $0 check because your deduction will pull out the time card amount, and then it will show up on the W-2 and on their employee file. So when you print the W-2s, you do not have to print them right away. You should print a W-2 totals report and double check that those federal withholding tax amounts and state withholding tax amounts all equal. So that was under year end and W-2 totals. And these should be just one line per employee. If you have a line that says SWT local wages and you do not work in multiple states, then there's something wrong with the wages for that employee. And it needs to be checked out before you can close the year. So that just tells you how to print the W-2 totals report, and then that you're going to print the W-2s on pre-printed forms using the option in reports, payroll, year-end W-2 forms. It's just going to ask you what year and what your Social Security limit is. And we've got that Social Security limit in these instructions. If they change it for this year, for 2020, then a lot of people don't remember, hard to remember what it was before, so we put it in here so it's easy for you to find. You can select a range, or you can print it for all employees by not selecting a range, or select a range for just 1 or 2 employees. That's especially helpful if you need to reprint just one W-2 that was incorrect. Like I said, we highly recommend you put them on paper first, because you have a limited supply of W-2 forms, and you do not want to print incorrect forms on all your available forms. You also should check the alignment on the W-2 forms on paper. So you can either, put them on top of each other, hold them up to the light to see if they're going to all line up in the boxes. And if there's a problem with that, you should probably call us to make sure that we can try to help you correct it. Or if you're confident in the way that the forms are showing on the paper, you can go ahead and load your forms into the printer and print them. Now, we recommend that when you do a test one, I always put an X in the upper left-hand corner on my plain paper, so I know if the form is going to turn itself upside down in my printer, kind of like when you do checks. Do you put them face up, face down, letterhead up, letterhead down, which way do you need to set them in? So you need to determine that before you print them the wrong way on the forms. And you may reprint the W-2 forms as many times as you want. There are, I think, 4 to 6 copies that are required, and these are just the forms that we provide are the single copy forms made for inkjet or laser printers. Those forms have multiple pages to them, 5 or 6 or 4 or 6 pages. You will print those forms 4 to 6 times. So you'll just keep printing them over and over, so each of the different copies of the form have been printed. Because you give like a couple copies to the employer, one of them goes to the federal government if you don't file electronically, and one of them you should keep for your records. The 1095C data entry, we've gone over that a little bit already. You will have the year-to-date totals. I think everybody in this webinar has the updated software where you should see those 1095 options on your year-to-date totals tab. You would make sure that you would have the information at your fingertips or the health insurance offer that you're reporting for them, so that you know what to put in there. You can import. This again talks about the import. And it is recommended that you do this after the calendar year is closed. So you can do this in January. Again, there's information about importing from the CSV file or the XLS file. It can be an XLS or a CSV file in our README. So this is a link to the README. If you click on that, it will bring up our README document. And then according to the instructions, you would just search for employer-sponsored health coverage. So if I just copy this, I can go to my document. I can do a Control F and then a Control V, and I can search for that. And there it is. So then this gives you a brief rundown of what the file is going to look like, different positions of the information, and it can read from an Excel workbook, or it can be a CSV file, whichever you're most comfortable with. If you're importing, I showed you the dialog earlier. It's going to ask you for the tax year. It's going to make you go out and find the document up here, and then you select the month. If you're doing it, you can do a month at a time, or you would do the whole year. If you have multiple companies, you must have a separate workbook for each company, and we must configure the database for each company to get the correct data connection. So it can be done for multiple companies. You would just have multiple workbooks, one for each set of data for each company. Again, you do not need to purchase forms for this. These forms print on white 8.5 by 11 paper with black ink. So we've included a few links that would be helpful when you want to try to figure out your filing requirements. The payroll W-2, W-3 information is on this link here. Basically, it gives you general instructions for the 2019 year for filing your W-2s and W-3s. And it also will show you the dates that we have already set up, so you can read through that if you want. But these are the dates that we have found in that link, that everything is due basically by the 31st of January for W-2s and W-3s, including electronic filing. Used to be that you had extra time to file electronically to the IRS, but not anymore. 1094, 1095C information. Again, this link would lead you to the instructions for those forms. It's highly recommended that you read through this so you can determine if you're a member of an ALE group, and you can determine what the requirements are for your company. And if you, what it also is somewhere in here, it will show you what the offer codes are and the safe harbor codes are. And then you can also double check and work with your accountant to determine what you should be. Like here are the offer codes. And you can read through these and try to determine which offer code best fits your company and the employee situation. It's highly recommended that you read that information if you do have to file a 1095. The 1099s, again, a link to the instructions for 1099, 1096 forms. We do have crystal reports for the 1096 and the W-3 form. So the W-3 and the 1096 do not print out of our software, but we do have crystal reports that anyone in support can send you and set up for you so that it will create your W-3 and your 1096 form. You can print 1099 forms out of our software under Reports, Accounts Payable, and then 1099 forms. And it defaults to the previous year. The amount has been $600, and I don't believe that that's changed as far as I know. So anybody who makes under $600 and is not an employee and is not a business does not need to report it. But anybody who makes over $600, you paid them through accounts payable over $600. They're not an employee. They're not a company that you did business for. It's an individual. Then you need to send them a 1099 for the amount of money that they earned through your company. On the employee file, or excuse me, on the vendor file, on page 2 is where you find the 1099 information that you can set up for. Some people pay their accountants, their attorneys. It could be subcontractors that you hire that aren't business. Anyway, then most of it would be non-employee compensation. That's what our program prints is for non-employee compensation. I know you do have to do it for rents and royalties sometimes, but most common one is non-employee compensation. Again, if you need help setting this up or determining if it would be a 1099 vendor, then you can call us and we can try to help you determine that or check with your accountant. The 1099 forms all have to be, and the 1096, all have to be submitted by January 31st. The 1094, 1095 forms, you have to submit the paper forms to the employees by January 31st. And then the paper forms are required to the IRS by February 28th. The electronic filing is required by March 31st. So you do have a little extra time to file to the IRS for 1094, 1095, but not so the 1099s and W-2s. So if you have not already ordered W-2 forms, we do have W-2 forms that you can order from us. We recommend that you order them from us. If you order them from or just pick them up at a Staples or your local office supply store, we cannot guarantee that they're going to print on with our program. So if you order the forms from us, we will guarantee that they do print correctly. And if they don't print correctly, we'll fix it and we'll make them. We'll get them so that they do work. But in order to get that guarantee, you do have to purchase them through us versus a third-party vendor. So again, the federal and state tax changes have not been made available yet that we're aware of. Um, we will let you know when we do get that information. We will give you an email regarding that. The federal vendor IDs and the FUT vendor IDs that you see back here, that is if you want to have our system automatically create the tax deposit invoices for you. So if you have vendor IDs, when you close out payroll, if you have them set up here, when you close out payroll, there's an option to create AP invoices from payroll. If those vendor IDs are filled in on the tax table, it will automatically put an AP invoice in accounts payable for the tax deposit liability that you need to pay. Now, most of you probably pay it electronically, in which you can then just enter it through cash management. But if you wanted to record it with a fake check, you can have it create the AP invoices for you from payroll and then just go and put a fake check to it when you go to do it. That's another way to track it. That gives it more of a trail. That's it for the year-end webinar. If you guys have any questions, you can certainly give us a call, and we will help to answer anything that you might have questions on. And thank you all for attending, and we will talk to you again soon.